When someone loves you deeply, it can be difficult for them to express that love in the way they want to. This is particularly true when it comes to emotional vulnerability. The person who loves you may distance themselves because they fear getting too close or letting their guard down completely. It is not a lack of affection that causes this behavior, but rather a deep fear that by allowing themselves to be open and emotionally available, they may eventually get hurt. The more they care for you, the more they fear the possibility of emotional pain. For many people, emotional vulnerability is one of the hardest aspects of any relationship. We've all experienced the sting of rejection or heartbreak, and these past experiences often shape how we approach new relationships. The person who loves you might have a history of being hurt by someone they trusted or cared for, and the fear of going through that pain again can cause them to pull away. When they love you so much, they're essentially putting themselves at risk by allowing their heart to become vulnerable again. And as a result, they might unintentionally create emotional distance between you by acting distant, aloof, or even ignoring you at times. Doesn't matter how long you've been married or how much better your life seems, sometimes the frame can still feel a little distant. This behavior might not make sense at first glance, especially when you know how much they love you. But when you understand the root of this fear, it starts to become clearer. For some, this fear stems from childhood experiences or past trauma. Perhaps they were neglected or betrayed in a previous relationship, and that emotional scar remains with them. They may carry these unresolved emotions into their current relationship, even though they care deeply for you. They want to love you fully, but they are unable to fully embrace that love without the fear of vulnerability creeping in. Oh, furthermore, people who have been hurt in the past often develop coping mechanisms to shield themselves from future pain. One of those mechanisms is emotional detachment. By keeping their feelings in check and distancing themselves, they protect themselves from potential heartbreak. However, this emotional defense can come across as cold or indifferent, even though it is the exact opposite of how they feel. This internal conflict of wanting to open up, but also fearing the consequences of doing so, can create a push-pull dynamic. They might act distant at times, but deep down, they're struggling with their own inner turmoil. What's important to remember is that when someone loves you this much, their actions are not a reflection of how they feel about you. It's more about how they feel about themselves and their own emotional boundaries. They may push you away, not because they want to hurt you, but because they're trying to protect themselves from getting hurt. This fear of vulnerability makes them hesitant to show their true feelings, even if those feelings are profound. This behavior can be confusing, especially when they show affection one moment and then seem distant the next. It's important to not take this as a sign that they don't care or that their feelings are waning. In fact, the opposite is true. The more they care for you, the more they fear the potential of losing you or being let down. Their emotional walls aren't a reflection of a lack of interest, but rather a way to shield themselves from the pain of possible rejection or loss. In relationships, trust is a key element in overcoming this barrier. The person who loves you deeply needs to feel safe enough to let go of their fear and let you in. It takes time and patience for them to build that trust. And sometimes it's not about pushing them to open up faster, but giving them the space and understanding they need to feel secure. Acknowledging their fear of vulnerability without judgment can help them feel more comfortable knowing that you are there for them despite their hesitations. The study shows that the majority of couples who reach out for help said 82% of those who sought Sometimes the fear of emotional vulnerability goes beyond just the risk of rejection. It can also be tied to a sense of control. People who have been hurt in the past may fear losing control over their emotions. Letting themselves love fully means surrendering to the experience and trusting that the other person will handle their heart with care. For someone who has been betrayed or let down, that sense of control is often a defense mechanism that makes them feel secure in their own emotions. They may resist emotional intimacy because they fear that they won't be able to handle the depth of their own feelings. Their retreat is a way of maintaining control over a situation that feels out of their hands. As challenging as this dynamic can be, it's important to remember that they are not intentionally trying to hurt you. Instead, they are navigating their own emotional landscape, trying to protect themselves from the vulnerability that comes with loving someone deeply. If you find yourself in a relationship with someone who pulls away or ignores you out of fear, it's essential to approach the situation with empathy and understanding. Rather than seeing their behavior as a rejection, try to view it through the lens of their own fear and emotional conflict. Love is a powerful force, but it can also bring with it a great deal of fear. When someone loves you deeply, they are opening themselves up to the possibility of emotional pain, and that's not an easy thing to do. The person who loves you may ignore you at times, but this behavior is rooted in a fear of vulnerability and an unwillingness to face the pain that comes with truly opening up. Their love is real, but they need the time and space to navigate their own emotional fears. By recognizing this, you can create a safe environment where they feel more comfortable letting down their walls and fully embracing the love they have for you. When someone loves you deeply, yet ignores you at times, it often has to do with the complex interplay between love and the fear of emotional dependence. This fear can lead to the person pulling back because they have internalized the belief that emotional attachment or dependence could potentially make them feel trapped or weak. While love is an immensely powerful emotion, it can be overwhelming for those who aren't entirely comfortable with the idea of being emotionally dependent on someone else. The thought of needing someone else so much and relying on them for happiness or emotional support can be deeply unsettling for them. In such situations, they may try to maintain their independence by pulling away or creating emotional distance, even though their feelings for you remain very strong. For some individuals, the fear of emotional dependence can stem from past experiences of being let down by people they trusted. Perhaps they were betrayed or abandoned by someone close to them, and that abandonment left a deep scar. The idea of depending on someone again feels unsafe, and they instinctively push back from allowing themselves to become vulnerable in a relationship. This fear manifests in the form of withdrawal, where they retreat emotionally when they feel their attachment to you is growing stronger. Though they love you and care about you deeply, they may be unwilling to face the discomfort that comes with the idea of depending on someone else for emotional stability or happiness. Matthew wrote, "It's important to recognize that this kind of emotional withdrawal isn't an indicator of lack of affection. Rather, it reflects the person's own emotional baggage and fears that they haven't yet learned how to navigate or overcome. This fear of emotional dependence can sometimes be deeply ingrained in a person's personality, perhaps stemming from their childhood or past experiences in romantic relationships. It could be a learned coping mechanism to avoid getting hurt again. The person might believe that by becoming too dependent on you or too attached, They could be putting themselves in a position where they are vulnerable to emotional pain if the relationship falters or ends. As much as they care about you, their fear of losing their independence or becoming overly reliant on another person can lead to behavior that seems cold, distant, or indifferent. They may ignore your attempts at communication or give minimal responses when they feel they are starting to lean on you too much. They might pull away when they sense they are growing attached because they feel uncomfortable with the vulnerability that comes with emotional intimacy. The universe always knows these things, and whether you think about it or not, Jesus always knew how to respond to the vulnerability that comes with emotional intimacy. This behavior is often a subconscious reaction to their fears of emotional dependence, not a conscious decision to distance themselves from you. To make sense of this behavior, it's crucial to understand that people with these fears often struggle with internal conflicts. They desire to love and connect with others, but at the same time they resist opening themselves up fully because they feel it could leave them exposed to hurt. The fear of being too dependent on you creates a paradox. They don't want to lose you or push you away, but they also don't want to feel like they need you in a way that can make them feel vulnerable or trapped. The emotional tug of war can make them retreat into themselves, even when their feelings for you remain just as strong as before. Christ says, this is who you are. In relationships, people often experience different levels of emotional intimacy, and not everyone is comfortable with the same degree of closeness. For someone who fears emotional dependence, even the smallest signs of attachment can feel like they're becoming too involved, which can trigger their instinct to create distance. Their tendency to pull away or ignore you might be their way of regaining a sense of control over their emotions, as they can become overwhelmed by the idea of losing themselves in the relationship. And what's more, the more things they fall outside of your relationship, the more they feel. It is also worth noting that individuals who fear emotional dependence may struggle with issues of self-worth and self-esteem. They may not believe they deserve to be fully loved or supported, or they may have a deep-seated fear of being judged or criticized by the person they care about. In these situations, it is common for them to pull back as they feel unworthy of the love or attention they're receiving. They might inadvertently push you away because they are afraid that by allowing themselves to become too emotionally dependent on you, they will risk feeling inadequate or rejected. This fear is often tied to past experiences or deep-rooted insecurities that they have not fully addressed. They are also feeling very uncomfortable with themselves and others. You have to get comfortable with the fact that you will lose some people along the way. While this behavior can be difficult to deal with, it's essential to approach the situation with patience and understanding. They may need time to process their emotions and fears about emotional dependence. It's crucial to respect their boundaries and give them the space they need to navigate their own feelings. At the same time, providing gentle reassurance that they are loved and that it's okay to depend on others can help them feel more comfortable letting their guard down. So this supportive and non-judgmental environment can encourage them to open up and begin to trust that emotional dependence doesn't have to equate to weakness or vulnerability. It can actually be a source of strength and connection in a relationship. However, it's important to note that while you may want to offer them emotional support and encouragement, it's also crucial to maintain your own boundaries. You can't force someone to change or to open up if they're not ready. The process of overcoming the fear of emotional dependence takes time, and the person must be willing to confront their fears in their own time. You must be okay with that versus owning to it. Let me give you two more words. Your role in the relationship is to be patient, understanding, and supportive, but you also have to respect their journey and allow them to grow at their own pace. On that powerful slow from episode 1 to the present, season 2 of Excellent Joy, we drop in conclusion. When someone loves you but withdraws or ignores you due to their fear of emotional dependence, it's not a reflection of their feelings for you. Rather, it's a sign of their struggle with vulnerability and their need for emotional independence. By understanding the root of their fears and giving them the space to address them, you can create a safe environment where they feel comfortable allowing themselves to depend on you. In time, this will allow for a deeper emotional connection built on trust, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. When someone loves you deeply but tends to ignore you or push you away, it can often be rooted in an underlying fear of emotional vulnerability. For many individuals, allowing themselves to fully open up to someone they love can trigger a sense of discomfort or anxiety. This fear may arise from personal insecurities or past experiences where they were hurt or abandoned after becoming emotionally invested in someone. The fear of getting too close, of opening their heart completely, may lead them to withdraw when they feel their attachment to you growing too strong. This does not mean that you are moving from a relationship where you both feel connected to each other before you feel connected to the law. At the core of this behavior is the fear of being emotionally dependent on another person. Emotional dependence doesn't just mean needing someone for support or affection. It can also involve the fear that they might lose themselves in the relationship or become too reliant on you for their emotional well-being. These fears often stem from a deep-seated concern that if they allow themselves to become too attached, they might lose their sense of identity or autonomy. For someone who's experienced emotional pain or instability in the past, it may seem safer to pull back to create distance than to risk the vulnerability of depending on someone else emotionally. The fear of emotional dependence can be particularly strong in people who have grown up in environments where emotions were not expressed openly, or where they were taught to be self-reliant and independent at all costs. When they start to feel that emotional pull towards someone, it can trigger an instinct to protect themselves from the possibility of being hurt. They might convince themselves that by keeping their distance, they're maintaining control over their feelings and their emotions. It's a defense mechanism, one that's been learned over time as a way to cope with feelings of powerlessness or vulnerability. However, the reality is that emotional dependence doesn't always mean weakness. It's a natural part of human connection. But for those who are afraid of it, this truth can be hard to accept. The person may love you dearly, but the thought of being too attached to you or depending on you emotionally brings up feelings of insecurity, fear, and even shame. They might believe that needing someone else for emotional support or validation is a sign of weakness, and in turn, they withdraw to protect themselves from what they perceive as potential emotional harm. What often happens in these situations is that the person might go through phases of intense closeness and connection, followed by periods of emotional withdrawal or ignoring you. The closer they get to you emotionally, the more they might start to feel exposed or vulnerable. And that's when their instinct to distance themselves kicks in. It's a pattern that can be confusing for the person on the receiving end of this behavior. It may feel like one moment they're deeply invested in you and the next they're distant or aloof. This is not a sign of a lack of love or affection. It's a response to their internal battle between wanting connection and fearing the emotional consequences of that connection. And this is how you know you're in connection with somebody, is the way they thrive in connection. It's important to understand that these actions are not a reflection of how they feel about you, but rather a reflection of their struggle with vulnerability. As a result, they might not fully allow themselves to experience the depth of connection they crave. And instead, they'll subconsciously distance themselves when the emotional intensity becomes too much. This intensity becomes too much could result in physical and emotional pain. The problem, of course, is that this avoidance strategy can create tension in the relationship. The person you care about might appear distant, cold, or unresponsive, when in reality, they're grappling with their own fears and insecurities. While it might feel like they're pulling away because they don't care or love you, the truth is that they might be doing so out of a desire to protect themselves. They might believe that by keeping their emotions at bay, they are safeguarding themselves from future hurt. But after living with the loss of their mother, Harriet, Mary began seeking freedom with words. She writes letters, diary entries. She begins to speak of what she felt at the time. But she also begins to speak of what she felt at. If you're in a relationship with someone who exhibits this behavior, it can be difficult to know how to respond. The key is to understand the root of their fear and to provide them with the space and reassurance they need to feel safe. Pushing them to open up when they're not ready can backfire and create even more distance. Instead, creating an environment where they feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable in their own time is important. This may take patience, but over time, the person will begin to feel more secure in the relationship and may eventually be able to let down their guard and allow themselves to rely on you emotionally. Another important aspect to keep in mind is that this behavior is not necessarily about you. It's about their own internal struggles. They may have a history of emotional trauma or difficulty trusting others, which has led them to guard their emotions carefully. In many cases, they might not even be aware of why they feel compelled to distance themselves from you. This behavior is often more about their own fears of getting hurt than it is about their feelings for you. They may not know how to handle the intensity of their emotions, and so their instinct is to pull back rather than face the vulnerability that comes with fully embracing those emotions. The reality is that people who love you but pull away due to fear of emotional dependence are often in a state of internal conflict. They may desire closeness and connection, but simultaneously fear the emotional costs of that connection. They may struggle to reconcile their love for you with their fear of becoming too emotionally dependent. And in that struggle, they might withdraw or act aloof, not because they no longer care about you, but because they are trying to protect themselves from what they perceive as an overwhelming vulnerability. Ultimately, understanding this dynamic is crucial if you want to have a healthy and compassionate relationship with someone who exhibits this behavior. It requires patience, empathy, and a willingness to allow the person to take their time in navigating their own emotional barriers. The key is to provide the right amount of emotional space while also being a supportive and understanding presence. With time, trust, and open communication, they may eventually feel secure enough to fully embrace their feelings for you and allow themselves to depend on you emotionally, creating a deeper and more fulfilling connection between the two of you. When someone loves you deeply but tends to ignore you, one reason behind this behavior could be a fear of losing themselves in the relationship. This can occur when a person begins to feel emotionally overwhelmed or worried about losing their sense of identity due to the intensity of their feelings. They might find themselves becoming too involved with you, which could cause them to feel emotionally drained or even trapped in the relationship. The love they feel for you is genuine, but the fear of giving too much of themselves and becoming too dependent can cause them to pull away as a form of self-preservation. This is like trying to hold a little baby and keep it safe. This struggle between love and the desire for emotional independence is not uncommon. Many people, especially those who have a history of emotional pain, have learned to guard themselves in relationships. The more they care for someone, the more vulnerable they feel and the more afraid they become of losing their individuality in the process. Emotional dependency can make them feel exposed, as if they no longer have control over their own emotions or life. The thought of getting too close to you might cause them to withdraw as a way to protect their emotional well-being, even though their feelings for you remain strong. At the core of this fear is the need to maintain a sense of self. When we fall in love with someone, it's easy to become emotionally entangled and lose sight of who we are outside of the relationship. For some individuals, the thought of becoming too emotionally dependent on another person can be unsettling. They fear that by giving too much of themselves to the relationship, they might lose their autonomy or become too enmeshed in the other person's life. This fear of losing themselves can create a powerful urge to pull away, even when their love and affection for you are still present. Moreover, this fear is often tied to past experiences where emotional vulnerability led to hurt or rejection. If they have been let down or hurt by someone in the past, they may view emotional closeness as a risk. They might fear that by opening up to you, they are setting themselves up for the same emotional pain they've experienced before. This fear can trigger a defensive reaction, where they subconsciously push you away in an attempt to avoid the potential for heartbreak or disappointment. It's important to recognize that this behavior isn't a reflection of their feelings for you. On the contrary, it may be a sign of how deeply they care, but are too scared to fully immerse themselves in the relationship. They might be afraid that by allowing themselves to love you entirely, they will lose control of their emotions and sense of self. They may feel that if they allow the relationship to become too intense, they will become emotionally dependent on you, and that dependency will make them feel vulnerable and exposed. For some people, emotional independence is something they have always valued. They might have grown up in an environment where they were taught to be self-sufficient, to rely on themselves and not to depend on others. These values can stay with them throughout adulthood, making it difficult to fully embrace the idea of relying on someone else emotionally. The more they feel themselves falling for you, the more they may become overwhelmed by the idea of losing themselves in the process. So notice also how he counsels them. They might begin to fear that they will become too attached to you and lose their own sense of purpose and identity. Additionally, the desire for emotional independence can sometimes stem from insecurity. If they have low self-esteem or a lack of confidence in their ability to handle vulnerability, they might avoid emotional closeness out of a fear of being judged or rejected. They might feel that they are not worthy of love or that their flaws will be exposed if they let their guard down. In these cases, the emotional withdrawal is a form of self-protection, a way to keep themselves safe from the perceived risk of being hurt or abandoned. As frustrating as it may be, understanding this internal conflict is key to navigating the situation. When someone loves you but pushes you away out of fear, it's crucial to show patience and understanding. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, try to be compassionate and acknowledge that their behavior is not a reflection of how they feel about you, but rather a reflection of their own emotional struggles. They may need time to process their fears and learn to trust both themselves and you in a way that allows them to open up without feeling threatened. A key component of helping someone work through these fears is creating a safe and supportive environment where they feel accepted and understood. Rather than pressuring them to change or to let you in immediately, try to give them the space they need to come to terms with their feelings. Encourage open communication and let them know that you are there for them no matter what. Over time, as they begin to feel more secure in the relationship, they may gradually let down their guard and allow themselves to experience the fullness of their love for you. In some cases, it may be helpful to have conversations about their fears and insecurities. While this can be a delicate subject, addressing it in a gentle and non-judgmental way can help them feel understood and less alone in their struggles. It's important to avoid pushing them too hard or trying to force them to open up if they are not ready. Instead, focus on fostering trust and reassurance. Let them know that you respect their emotional boundaries and that you are willing to work with them at their own pace. Ultimately, the goal is to help them realize that emotional intimacy doesn't mean losing oneself in the process. It's possible to maintain a sense of self while still being emotionally connected to someone else. By providing support, patience, and understanding, you can help them move past their fear of emotional dependence and learn to fully embrace the love and connection they feel for you. In conclusion, the reason someone who loves you deeply might ignore you at times is often tied to an internal fear of losing themselves in the relationship. This fear may stem from past experiences, insecurity, or a desire to protect their sense of independence. While this behavior can be painful, it's important to remember that it's not a reflection of their feelings for you, but rather a manifestation of their fear of emotional vulnerability. By offering understanding, space, and encouragement, you can help them work through their fears and build a deeper, more trusting connection with you.